The only thing I can remember whiting out on a massive scale was the stubble on Robo Hunter's chin, because the then group editor decided that good heroes weren't unshaven. So there you go.
Robin, thanks for joining us. So I guess if we start at the beginning, did you draw as a kid, and what sort of things?
Yeah, I always drew as a child, and I think, like most of the people I know, we used to draw soldiers and knights and Romans, and I used to draw pictures of the Beatles, and you just draw anything you saw, really. But lots of adventure stuff and lots of action stuff. You drew the stuff you played with, so you played with toy soldiers, and you draw soldiers, wouldn't you? It's that. You drew stuff like that.
How did you discover comics?
Well, the first comics I can remember, I told somebody this recently, the first one I can actually remember reading was Play Hour, which Colin Wyatt actually worked on when I was reading it, which we've realised more recently. And then TV comic, but then I just suddenly got given a whole load of American comics when I was probably it'd be about 1961, when I was about four or five. And that's when I really got into comics. I think I just liked American comics. I just liked them a lot. There were loads of Marvel, there was loads of DC, but there was loads of everything. I mean, I just liked them all. I'd read anything from sort of crypto to you name it. Fantastic. I love the stuff. I love the Marvel stuff because I like the sort of you all felt you were part of. You sort of joined in, didn't you? It was that whole kind of. It was like you were part of the game and things with the Stan Lee editorials and things. Even as a kid, you realise that. The whole thing about comics is when you got them given to you in a huge box of comics, you'd read them all. You'd enjoy them all equally. So you'd enjoy, you'd be reading, I don't know, the Doom Patrol at one moment. Then you'd be reading Spider-Man. I can remember being really impressed with Daredevil, with the early issues of that. And it's like a really curious thing because I started reading comics then. I still, to this day, think of the X-Men as being something comparatively recent, which is really foolish, but that's great.
Oh, that's great. And when you were drawing, did you start off by copying images that you saw, or was it coming from your head? What was?
Well, I think you did. No, I think as kids, when you're a little bit older, you look at comics and you draw your own comics, sort of based on the comics you've looked at. I mean, I'm sure I copied a few pictures and things, but you kind of did it your own way because that was just more fun, wasn't it, really, to do it like that? I mean, copying was great, but you kind of learned from it and things. But I remember everybody always wanted to create their own superheroes. And they were obviously very derivative, as you can imagine. I think somewhere my grandmother kept a couple of drawings. I think they may be knocking around. But I suspect that they weren't probably comics, they were probably something else I'd drawn. And I've probably got some old stuff from when I was probably about 10. Just bits and pieces. But I couldn't even be certain of that. They're in a box somewhere with a sketchbook, so yeah.
So the kind of being exposed to all those comics and a love of comics, is that what kind of drove you towards wanting to work in the comics industry, basically?
Well, I always liked comics most of all, but what I wanted to be was what was known as a commercial artist in those days, before a graphic designer was a thing. I wanted to draw things for a living. Okay. And the fact I liked comics meant that most things I drew had a kind of outline around them with some colour in the middle. It was kind of, I went that way with drawing just because I like graphic images and like comics are, the sort of images that comics were. So, when I was at art college, my solutions to pretty much any brief would be something that was vaguely a comic. It wasn't necessarily always the best thing, but,
And did that go down well?
Well, yeah, if it was when it was done okay, yes, they did. And sometimes sometimes I had to. I did everything else as well. But it's just, when you're doing graphics, you kind of have a particular way of looking at it. I mean, obviously, some colleges, everybody would go basically for, typographic solutions or whatever. Mine would tend to be illustrative. I mean, the thing is, I did do a lot of graphics, and I have done quite a lot of packaging and stuff over the years. But Well, it was my typography tutor who actually bought me a copy of the first issue of 2000 AD. So I think that kind of says that they weren't too far. I think it's,
That's positive encouragement.
I think my thesis was actually on comics in the mass media. So, you know what I mean? I probably over-egged the pudding a bit there. So, yeah. But I did go back there because I actually found Cliff Robinson there because he was at the same college I went to. But he was the younger brother of a friend of mine from school. So obviously, I found him. So yeah.
Did you? So you got the job with 2000 AD as art editor, as you were assistant art editor first, weren't you? And then.
Well, basically, when I finished art college, I'd actually written. There was a publication, which I don't know whether it still exists, called the Artists and Writers Yearbook. And they list all the publishers and all the agencies and everything. And so I wrote to all the publishers of comics that were in there, which were DC Thompson with some smaller publishers. Then there was obviously the bit that became IPC, because this was a slightly out-of-date copy in the library. So I wrote off asking if I could bring up my portfolio and look to try and get a job. And all the letters ended up in the Kingsreach Tower, pretty much. In fact, I think one letter from me ended up in the Kingsreach Tower after I was already employed. So, and the idea was, I mean, they tried to be fair, they did, when I went up, I think it was Kelvin Gosnell who was the editor, or just stopped being the editor. I think Steve was about to be the editor, who actually told me not to bother and to go and work go and get a job in an advertising agency, on the grounds that all I'd be doing would be bodging artwork, as he put it. And I thought, well, that sounds fine to me.
So was your interest then to actually draw comic strips, or was it to work in kind of the more graphic design and kind of the editorial role in art? Well,
the thing is, I obviously wanted to draw, but it was quite good to get a job, because then you could, you come out of college, the idea of being freelance, well, you move from wherever you are, you move to London, you've got to get somewhere to live, you've got to pay for it and everything. The best thing to do is to try and get a job, because otherwise you're going to be struggling in your bedroom for the rest of your life. But I mean, it was a great job to get. I mean, if you're going to have one job in your life in an office, that was that's a cracking job to have. So yeah, so and of course you'd learn there as well as the other thing. Because of course I'd learned all the sort of, I'd learned the technical sort of production techniques like copy fitting and stuff like that, all the stuff that doesn't exist anymore. But of course when you go and do it practically, you realise you don't do it by calculation, you do it with the edge of a piece of paper, it's that. So it was good. So I learned quite about production and things. And the thing is, you're 21, you want a job, don't you? And you get a job and you're, in the Kingsreach Tower overlooking the Thames and things, and it's really great fun.
What kind of stuff were you actually doing in that role when you first started?
Well, when I started, there was Steve McManus had just become the editor, and Roy Preston was the sub-editor who was there for a very short time. Then Alan Grant became the sub-editor. I'd been there for a couple of weeks, I think. So, and originally, you were doing the usual things, which was cleaning up artwork, correcting lettering, doing exactly what Kelvin had said, and it's bodging, basically. It's repairing, restoring, correcting. In fact, the first couple of weeks I worked, the NUJ were on strike, so I actually spent the first 2 weeks looking at all the artwork that had accumulated in 2000 AD in the previous 9 months. So not a lot of anything. I worked with, Colin was the art editor, and Colin Colin was really good because he knew that I liked comics and science fiction, probably, whereas his true love was Disney and that sort of artwork and things. So he did let me do pretty much anything I wanted. And then obviously Cole went off freelance and I got to be art editor. So the way it had happened is they started Star-Lord. Kevin had decided to go freelance at this point, Kevin Neal, right? So he'd been working on all these things editorially. Some of the staff had gone off to Star-Lord. Kelvin had handed over the reins of 2000 AD to Steve McManus. So it was kind of starting again. So it was just time to get some new staff and things. It was getting a job on the comic, but it was also getting a job in IPC juvenile publications. It was that sort of there was a vacancy for there was a couple of vacancies, so I got a job that was going. I mean, to be fair, it was really great. It was 2000 AD, but if you think about it, it could easily have been Royal Rovers or, God help me, Tiger. So, you know what I mean? I was lucky in that way. Yeah, definitely.
Did you? So when you were bodging the art, did you have to like redraw stuff in the style of the artist if you had to change things that maybe didn't come across?
Yeah, you did actually. And there's one artist that used to come in with half-finished artwork, and he would slap it on the desk and say, "Look, I want this on this. You finish it off for me." And he'd be out the door before you could say anything. That was quite good to learn. Sorry, I'd like to say Mike Dory. So there's all the artists came in. So I mean, the thing is, if you think about it, you didn't have to do much to most of the artists that came in. So the artists, because the thing is, all the artists that come into the office, I got to know them all pretty quickly. So if Kevin brought his stuff in, McMahon brought his stuff in, Brian Bolland, Dave Gibbons, Carlos Lascara lived in England at the time, so he brought his stuff in. So you know what I mean. Most of that stuff didn't need anything apart from a logo, of course, on, and the occasional. A lot of the stuff would be cleaning up the lettering once it was lettered, maybe occasional bits of resizing. Obviously there'd be sort of editorial requirements for things to be changed, but pretty much that was straightforward. But then there was the more problematic artwork that you'd have to do, bigger changes to. So
I've seen some of Massimo Blardinelli's early artwork from the first sort of 20 issues of 2000 AD, and what somebody has done is they've where he's put a lot of detail, because obviously it wouldn't print properly, they've actually painted out the detail with just white paint because to make it sort of clearer.
Oh, no, nothing like that, I promise you. There would be nothing like that at all. I'd never do anything like that. What you do with that is, in fact, the only thing you'd have to do then, perhaps, is if there was some pencil showing. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with Massimo's artwork. Most of that would have printed. And if you look at the stuff from the 50s and 60s, the fine line was a very, very fine line on all of that artwork. If you look at some of the Western strips and things, it's finer than Massimo ever used. So I think it's probably just somebody deciding, I don't like that, I want it to be a bit clearer, and being a bit foolish about it. So no, we didn't do nothing like that. Occasional bit of delineation, perhaps, if there was something very complex and things. That would be as far as it went. And that would usually be not because, it wouldn't be because Steve or I wanted it, because the group editor had said he didn't like it, he wanted something changed. Hence, the only thing I can remember whiting out on a massive scale was the stubble on Robo Hunter's chin, because the then group editor decided that good heroes weren't unshaven. So there you go. If you look at the reprint, you can see his beard comes and goes over a couple of issues before they gave up on it and just let us carry on with it as it was.
Was there much censorship of the artwork?
Well, not really, no, because the thing is, the idea was to be quite sensible about it, because most of the guys wouldn't try and stick stuff in there because there's something a little bit unprofessional about it, because it's going to cause more trouble, it's going to be taken out and things. So there was no need to do that, because we were kind of stretching it a bit anyway. If you think of some of the stuff, think of some of Dredd's language, for instance. That's kind of thinly disguised and unsuitable. I was told the two things you weren't allowed to have in comics were, let's just remember, you could never call a character Clint, and you could never use the word flick. So Roy the Rovers was never seen to fuck the ball up the wing, and there was never a character called Clint at the same time, just because the fear of letterpress printing might make this go horribly wrong. I'm not even sure that isn't quite, I'm not even sure that's even a truth, but this is what I was told at the time.
And were you, there was, I thought there was a rule about no exit wounds as well, in, when someone gets shot.
We did try and keep the blood down, because it's such an easy thing to criticise, because obviously 2000 AD came after Action, and Action had caused so much trouble that obviously we tried to keep that stuff to a minimum. The thing is, you read those 2000s, I've never read one and thought, that doesn't look realistic because the blood isn't coming out of the back of the guy's head. You always got around that sort of stuff, and it didn't need doing, really. And everybody got to know that and things. I think there was a thing going on, I remember the thing, Mick, which was all blood is black, I think was one of the things that was done, so there was nothing too visceral when anything was shown. There's lots of really good artists that I'm not so familiar with that have worked since, I know that. But I do know that the guys I worked with, I was very lucky because they were, they are and still are, top artists. People lost like Massimo. So yeah, so they were all great. I just loved that artwork was. If you imagine, you want to do a comics, you're out of art college, and what you're doing is you're handling Dave's artwork or Brian's artwork or Mickey's artwork, Kev's. It's kind of like something completely different. And because I grew up with more American comics than British comics, although those British comics I liked, something like Wham I particularly enjoyed, that I didn't really like the Valiant and those sort of British comics because I was, rather spoiled by American stuff. So when you saw this fantastic black and white artwork, you just thought, this is just fantastic. It's just brilliant. And of course, those guys were all vying with each other to do better artwork as well. So, it got better and better.
There was, you could really see there was a slightly competitive element. You look at when McMahon first starts and then kind of when he stops doing Dread, by the time he's got there, he's got it's like light years ahead of where he came from. It's amazing.
Well, I think in the first place, probably, as I remember, because I've missed some of the very, very first bits I've missed. But obviously, to start off with, Mickey was supposed to be doing something that matched Cogs. And there's a couple of episodes, I can remember Steve and I reprinting something, and actually, even us trying to struggle to work out who'd drawn it. Obviously, that wasn't then a problem, but things evolved. But I've got to say, the competition was all very positive because people did share technique tips, and they did share, they encouraged each other to do better.
So, with seeing all this artwork and everything, did you ever get into actually wanting to keep the artwork or collecting it, whatever? Or was it just kind of you just wanting to just enjoy the experience and seeing it?
Do you know what? There was no thought of that whatsoever. It really was never a thing. Nobody ever thought about this. The artwork just went back into a vault, and that was it. You know what I mean? I didn't know anybody that collected artwork, and I don't think anybody did. It just wasn't. I know it sounds unlikely now, but it wasn't a thing. There was very little comic collecting of any sort, so that was a comparatively new thing. Once I started working,
there's a bit of controversy, I guess, about people getting their artwork returned and stuff like that. I think it was in the late 80s they started actually. They needed to empty out the vaults, and so they returned as much artwork as they could. Did you get your stuff back?
No, what actually happened was when I went freelance in 1984, and because everybody was becoming unhappy about the fact they weren't getting their artwork back, but other people started to reprint. I think it's when they started reprinting as well. People wanted their artwork back, and quite understandably, because some of that artwork had so much work put into it. And I think they wanted it back because they wanted it back to own it again, not thinking purely in terms of commercial, selling it all. I don't think that was the prime motivator. So the last thing I did before I went freelance was I persuaded John Sanders, who was the managing director of the Juvenile Publications, that it would be a good idea to let people have their artwork back because that's the way everything was going. And he said, Syndication International, who used to reprint all this stuff abroad and things, wouldn't have it because they were afraid that if the artwork went, they lost a copy of it, they wouldn't have anything to reprint. So this rather stupid deal that was negotiated was if the artists were willing to have a transparency made of each page of artwork, and I think it would cost about £1, they could have their artwork returned. And although that's not ideal, it was better than not getting the artwork back. So I actually told all the artists this was the deal, and I would try and find their artwork for them before I left. And I know that Mick got a lot of his artwork, Dave did, Kevin found lots of Kevin's artwork. I mean, I got bits of my artwork back. And basically anybody that responded got their artwork back. Then I left, and that was it. And then it was only later, as you say, when they threw open the vaults that unfortunately it became a free-for-all. And a lot of stuff was destroyed, and it was. If you ever went in the original art vault, it was a fantastic place. And although people go on about the Frank Bellamy spreads knocking around and things, the real treasure was at the back. There was like wall to ceiling across a huge warehouse, which had little tiny packets, and they were all the artwork from all those war picture libraries and all the small publications, which was a lot of them drawn by fantastic artists, and that whole lot was just dumped, basically. So that's the artwork. So yeah.
I've heard a story about a lot of art kind of being dumped in a skip and then certain people coming and kind of just fishing it out and keeping it because it was it's going to be trashed. So you think about that now. I know that it didn't have a huge value then. There wasn't a market for it, but just the amount of work that's gone into that art, it just seems so sad that it would have been destroyed.
No, I'm of the opinion that anybody that's got a page of artwork that they've got and it wasn't bought from the legitimately should consider whether that should go back to the artist that it belongs to, because there's a lot of stuff missing even now. A lot of stuff's been sold legitimately, and it can be like, a lot of people have done that happily. But there is stuff that people just came across. There was stuff that was knocking around whichever bit of Fleetway it became. So I think lots of Massimo never got any artwork back. I mean, the thing is, you have to remember the quantities of artwork we're talking. If you think about how much Massimo Blardinelli drew, how many pages of artwork that is, the actual sheer physical quantity of it. Obviously, you wouldn't get it all back, but it would have been nice if some of it had gone back. Because everybody's got some Massimo stuff, but Massimo's never had a penny for it. So
Because I know that there are some stories about stuff being stolen. I know that there was someone's dumped some stuff on eBay. There was like 15 pages of Viscera Tharg art. And I sent him a message and said, because I know Carlos quite well. I said, "Where did you get this from?" And he said, "Oh, someone who worked at 2000 gave it to me in exchange for some army surplus equipment."
Well, I'm lucky because I got given when I left. Simon Geller got Alan to write a Smith robot being retired Carlos story, so I've got 4 pages of Carlos artwork with my droid in it. So I'm lucky and legitimately sourced, I'd like to say.
It's a tragedy, and really, and especially now that it is worth quite a lot of money, and you've got a lot of artists who don't necessarily have a pension. They've got to carry on working, and if they did have this artwork, or if their families had this artwork, they could get the money for it, which is a shame, really.
It is a shame, and the other thing that it's a shame is if we'd known that there was going to be an aftermarket for artwork, we'd have insisted on carrying on using decent photographic prints for all the logos and everything on 2000 AD pages, as opposed to the photocopies, all of which, as you've obviously seen this artwork, have yellowed because the acid in the paper has reacted with the double-sided tape that they were stuck on with. So that's why a lot of that stuff looks so naff now. And I'd like to say, if anybody's got any of my artwork and they want the logos redone, I'd be quite happy to tidy it up for them. The thing is, you can't really worry about that, though. That's the point. And the thing is, this really nice thing at the moment is, I know some artists are actually doing quite nicely out of doing commissions. So, redrawing things they've drawn in the past, or usually for a lot better rate of pay than they were done in the first place. So that's nice. Some of Mick McMahon's stuff he's done, and some of the stuff he's done in the last couple of years as commissions, some of the most beautiful drawing he's done. It's really nice stuff.
There's so much kind of thought that's gone into the layout on them. It's crazy sometimes. I I was round another art fiend's house, and he had this. He'd bought this basically a ring binder full of the designs that Mick had done for. He did an ABC Warriors story in the early 2000s, and it was so unbelievably detailed that it was kind of almost troubling, because he'd drawn every page, and then he'd laid every page out, and then he'd drawn every page how it would look if it was all on one page together. It was mind-boggling. It was crazy. It was great.
The thing is, sometimes if that's the way you've got to do it, that's the way you've got to do it. And sometimes Mickey actually worked out recently. He used the government's inflation calculator to work out what the page rate for a page of artwork should be now. And it's quite disconcerting because it isn't anywhere near it. And I think if you do it in reverse, it means the 2000 AD pages be the equivalent of 30 quid a page now. So there you go.
Well, I think Pat Mills' book that I read recently, he was saying that the page rate for writers and artists, letters, etc., has been frozen since the 90s, which it's terrible, really. I mean, if that's your main source of income.
The thing is, though, you've got to remember, 2000 AD sold 100,000 copies a week, 52 weeks of the year. And although the cover price was low and there was advertising, that's a different market than, I don't know how many they sell today, but it's nowhere near that. and remember that you had to, you know what I mean? You filled that comic. And in those days, remember, there was no thought of reprint markets or anything. It was just that was the use of it and things. Maybe it'd be sold abroad to, Spanish or Italian publication, but that would be as far as it went. So they could make, IPC made good money out of those sort of figures. And we hardly ever reprinted apart from special annuals, so yeah.
The creators' rights issue seemed to raise its head when Titan started doing the prestige format reprints, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
They started earning a load of money off it, and yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't. It was annoying. I mean, they built an empire on it, to be fair, and I'm sure a lot of that's to do with Nick's ability as a businessman, which he should be congratulated for. But the thing is, they'd never have got to reprint the rest of the stuff had they not got a free run at the 2000 AD stuff in the first place. I know it's just reprint is king. I think the regrettable thing about reprint now is that there's no new comics. It's not the same thing. You're not producing new comics. Everything is reprint. That's the thing, and it's people that like to be drawing comics aren't, because all that's happening is the same stuff is being reprinted over and over and over again. And very good though it was, when you've seen something reprinted for sort of a dozen times, it's kind of like, come on. Especially when some of the stuff that's beautiful artwork reprint, but actually the stories are disjointed because somebody's artwork will be printed and there's no, consistency. Not the best stories and things, so who knows. Now I've got to say, my favourite reprinting, but having said that, is the cover that Mick did for the paperback of the Cursed Earth reprint. The Ronald McDonald thing is one of my favourite 2008 images in years. I love it. It looks quite a lot like Pat Mills as well, but I think that was accidental, according to me. You check it out.
So, in your role as the art editor, how did you work with the artist? Did you work with cover designs? Is that right?
Yeah, I designed lots of the covers. Steve would say, look, we need covers for next month, or because we're always working 6 weeks ahead. So he'd tell me what the dates were. He'd go through some scripts and he'd say, we need cover for this, and this. And he'd give me a rough note of it, and I'd go away and design covers to go out to the artists. So we could make sure that we had, you didn't duplicate, you tried to keep them as different as possible. And also, you try to share out the covers between the stories equally. So if there was something really good as an image, Steve would spot it, throw it to me and say, what can we do with this? And so, yeah, I used to design the covers like that. But I used to also put the logos and indicate where everything else would go on them, just because it made it easy when they came in to get them ready to go to get them ready for colouring and everything.
So in that period where you were doing that job, the covers were great, and something that I've seen quite a lot of recently is like the logo being covered by images, because it's like, I don't know whether that still goes on, that planning stage, but it just seems like it's more like an image and a logo together rather than being incorporated. They always seem like they sat so well together.
Well, we tried to do it like that. The logo that I did, because the original 2000 AD logo was Kevin had done. It's the kind of the one that reduces in size from left to right. That one was Kevin's, I think. Then there was an interim one, which was like a curved one. But then I did the one that we stuck with for a long time, which is the sort of rather chunkier curved one. And of course, the thing is, that fitted quite well with most things, because the curve meant there was lots of room around it and things. So obviously there's room for lots of things, but it did fit in comfortably. And you could, because there was some black bars on the bottom of it, you could always cover those if you wanted to. I mean, you know what I mean? There was always some scope to do things like that, but still to hold it into the... The thing is, with a logo like that, you've got to make sure it doesn't look like somebody's hat, was the issue, I think. And of course, then we had to add tornado to it and all sorts of things, didn't we? I can't remember exactly what happened. So, yeah.
Did you actually design that logo?
That one, yeah, the chunky one with that's the two and the bottom bar of the two goes underneath the zeros. Yeah, that's the one I did. The one that then you could do a really cod version of metallic airbrushing on it.
You went freelance in, was it 84?
I'd always done bits of freelance while I was working. And in 1984, I planned on going freelance, because it was about time to do it, because I had sort of 6 years at that point. And I was getting married, and so I had sold my flat, and I had to get a flat. And in those days, being self-employed meant being self-employed. You wouldn't get a mortgage if you were self-employed unless you could show, I can't remember, it's 3 or 5 years of accounts, okay? So I had to wait until I got a mortgage before I could actually go freelance. So I left in, I think it was October of '84. And then I worked for 2000 intermittently after that. I did all sorts, because they still gave me lots of stuff to do and things, which was nice. And I worked for, at the same time, I worked for Ian Rimmer, who'd gone to Marvel UK, and he did eventually go to Marvel UK, and I did covers for Tiger, and I did Battle, and all sorts of, basically anybody wanted to cover. The guy that was the group art editor, Doug Church, he gave me loads of really good stuff to do, which was nice.
Are you pleased you left at that point, or do you think it would have been fun to stay on with 2000 for longer?
Well, the thing is about it is, it was about time to go, and I was a bit torn at the time, because somebody had offered me a really good job at the time, which I've been doing some, I've done some packaging. I redesigned KP's Outer Spaces and some other stuff for the agency that did KP. And the guy that ran the agency, the branding agency, offered me a job. And at that point, I thought, I've got to go and do something different because I need to move on. And I need to say, I'm going to go into branding and advertising and things full time, or I'm going to go freelance, which is what I want to do. So I said, no, it's the time to go freelance. And I was doing I had some sort of fun things to do. So I was doing things like I worked for New Internationalist. I did, you know what I mean? There was good stuff around. So it was time to go and have a go at it and see if I could do it.
In Steve McManus's book, he noted that there was some friction with Richard Burton when you took over as editor.
Well, I never worked with Burt as the editor. So he just
did you not?
No, he just didn't give me any freelance work. He just got his own back on me for years of no. He didn't give me a lot of work. It was him and Alan Mackenzie, wasn't it? So that's pretty much, I couldn't get any work off after that point. There was a little bit of that. My thing with Burt, I think I said this to somebody recently. It's like Steve got the timing of that wrong. I didn't leave because they moved, because I'd left before they moved. Steve was still the editor when I left, and I can prove that because I've got a leaving card. Okay, yeah. The thing with Burt is that I'd worked with Alan Grant, who is like the guys that were trained by Thompson, which is John Wagner was, and I think Pat was as well. I'm not quite sure. But the guys that were trained by DC Thompson, or the guys that were trained by Sid Bicknell at what would be Fleetway, then becoming IPC, they were really shit-hot sub-editors. They were magazine-quality sub-editors. They were proper magazine journalists. And when you'd worked with somebody like Alan, but worked at a slightly different pace, and of course it's quite frustrating if you could still get 52 comics out a year. You know, so basically it was more of a slight frustration. And then Richard went off to work on a computer magazine, which was edited by Tony Tyler, the guy that used to be the editor of the NME. And I got lots of work off them because I was still working there. And then the new replacing Burt was Simon Geller, who was come from the Teeny Mags, and he was another great magazine journalist. So that was great fun. So that was my next lot of really enjoying working on 2000. Because of course Simon Geller was really, we had great fun, and he was sort of fast. There's a thing when you have to get something out regularly like that. The secret is you have to do the boring stuff first to make sure that's done, or not boring, but the repetitive stuff and the stuff that has to be done. And it doesn't matter whether it's sending out the pound postal orders or marking up the issue Steve would have to do. And we all had boring things to do. Steve had lots of, dull process procedural things to do. And of course, everybody has to pull their weight equally. So that was so when you're working with well-trained journalists, you can do that and go to the pub for a game of pool. Whereas if you're working with somebody that's more of a comic fan, it does slow things down a little bit. And that would be my only, place about Richard. Which has lots of some other very good qualities, I expect.
Well, so, it's interesting to hear the other side of it. So
So it wasn't. So Steve had forgone, because I've talked to Steve about it. He thought I didn't leave till after Burt had taken over, but I'd already gone by then, but it was based on when I could get a mortgage, not anything else.
Do you think if you were starting out now, you'd go into comics? Because there's not much of a British comics industry left, really, is there?
Starting now. No, if I'm finishing up, I'm going to go into comics. Do you know what? I expect every kid that liked things, that the kids that wanted to do comics are going to be doing computer games now, I'm sure of it. The thing is about comics is it was a great thing because, when I went freelance, as I said, I could draw a war story or a You Are the Ref strip for Roy the Rovers or Transformers. There was like lots of stuff around and things. And you could get work doing comics. Now, I don't know, I hardly know anybody that draws comics for a living. Even the number of people that work for Marvel and DC in the States, the English people. Lots of the writers are still working, but loads of the artists don't do anything anymore. It's that thing. I think comic fandom gave birth to an awful lot of comic artists who basically, I think a lot of them for a long time could live at home with their parents and do it, as opposed to being like grown-ups that had to make a living. I think that's what the difference is. Well, you have to think, the guys that did the 2000 stuff, the artists we've been talking about, because they're the ones I know, I'm sure there's other artists exactly the same. They gave more than they were getting out of it. They gave more, they put more hours into it than could possibly make financial sense. They put that effort into it because they wanted to do it as well as possible. The thing is, that's okay, but you can only do that for a certain length of time and have a normal life. It sort of overwhelms, I think. I think everybody now would like to do it more sensibly. Some people have always been sensible, like Dave Gibbons was always very sensible at the balance between work and his home life and things. He always had it right. But then I know lots of people that you could ring them up at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's guaranteed they'll still be at the drawing board. It was just exciting thing to be involved in because it was just of its moment at that point. It was just like, it was the comic equivalent of punk, wasn't it? It was great.
I know Pat Mills has talked about this quite a few times, about whether the comic industry could be revived, about aiming comics at children, etc. Do you think that's... I know you were involved in the Alternate or something, there was Alternate or something, they were trying to develop a new kids comic, weren't they?
We've tried to do that. I mean, at one point we tried to... we're going to try and do it with... at one point we all went out to Colchester, to John's, and I think that was Pat, Kevin, me... Mickey, Fjord, and we were going to try and do something then, but never came to anything. And other people have tried. I just think the thing is, it's a hard thing to do, and I'm with Pat. I'd like to do that. I've always said I'd like to do kids comics because I've worked quite a lot on nursery titles. Okay, over the years with people like Reader. Okay, I am doing. They reckon that their nursery titles are aimed at 4 or 5 year olds. Well, I was reading Batman comics when I was 4 or 5, and I see no reason why the kids nowadays couldn't be reading those as well. So, if somebody says to me, "Oh, my kid likes comics, what do you read?" You just have to say, "Well, just go to the bookshop and buy them Asterix or something, Go and buy them Asterix or, it's that they've run out of things that are going to appeal. And the thing is, if they do appeal, they can't own it. You were at that 2000 AD anniversary event. The people that were there. There's a lot of people of probably 10 years younger than most of the people that the artists and writers were talking about, because they're the people that were reading it when we were doing it, and they've grown up with it, but nothing has filled the space in between.
There's not a new generation of people coming through, really, is there? Which is kind of... It means it has a limited shelf life now. I mean, even all of the classic stuff doesn't seem to be generating a new following as well.
And I liked a lot of the independent comics that people have tried to do, but they're a bit navel-gazy. And there's that thing about people trying to do the comic, but you've got to have the distance. You've got to say, yeah, I want to do my own comic, but I'm still going to try and I'm going to get somebody else to edit it for me. So basically, I'm not just going to indulge myself. I'll get somebody else to give me a really critical overview of it, and do it like that. There's got to be that sort of, to make it okay. And it's like the people that are doing independent comics seem to think they want it to be like Love and Rockets and not like 2000 AD. It's that, except it's not Love and Rockets. It's neither. It's in between. It's that. And it's a shame, really. It is a shame because I know that I would still, when I had children, I'd like them to have been able to have a comic they liked. But in the end, they didn't. So, it's fine. How does Philip Pullman thing do? I don't really know very much about it. This comic, they do have a philosophy that they keep, I can't remember what it's called. There's the one that started online, but I think they're doing some print issues as well. Philip Pullman was involved in this, but I know they've said that every couple of years they go back and start again for the new generation of readers, which I think would be not a bad idea. The model for nursery titles, like the ones I've worked on, is you just basically reprint the same stuff every couple of years because children don't buy it for themselves, their parents buy it.
I remember being a kid and reading things like Buster and Whizzer and Chips, and the stories that I was reading were just reprints from the 70s most of the time. The ones that I really enjoyed were all Ken Reid and stuff like that they were printing.
Yeah, the old stuff's. I think when my kids were little, the best comic out there was a reprint of DC Thompson stuff. So it was old Beano and Dandy stuff that was being reprinted, just because it was the old and the old really great stuff. The stuff that I really want, I really wish they'd reprint. The British comic I like the most that was never being reprinted properly it was Wham. And I'd love to see some of that stuff. I'd love to see Grimly Fiendish and all that sort of stuff reprinted. I don't know it's even filmed. I was talking to the guys to Michael Mulcher from Rebellion, and I did say, is there any chance of them finding that? Because that was some lovely stuff there. That was a great comic. That was a comic with, I had a sense of identity, which was good. I think you'd have to be selective, because there's always been some naff stuff. I mean, there would be people that liked all those things like Black Bob and I can't remember the Q bikes, General Jumbo. I mean, I remember loving those. Are great ideas as a kid because there was a bit more in there than just the straightforward Dennis being spanked with a slipper stuff. But I think I like those things when you go back, because I like the things where there's at least 12 frames a page and sometimes more. Some of those things that are parodied by Biz so well deserve to be parodied. No, but I think it's a shame. It would be a shame. Because I don't know how you do comics. I don't know how people do comics and make financial sense of it.
Who is your daddy and what does he do?